Hi there, and welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. My name is Robin, and today I want to talk about An Echo of Things to Come, which is the second book in the Licanius trilogy. And yeah, to say The Shadow of What Was Lost, the first book in the trilogy, was a surprisingly good read, would be an understatement. Largely because, I've really only seen this book hyped up on booktube, and I tend to be very wary of books that only seem to be very popular in a very specific realm of the interwebs, for lack of a better term. And that's very much the case with this series. I don't see anyone just raving about it the way people on booktube discuss it. So I kind of went into it with a 10 foot full and much of that skepticism, and I was happy to be very disappointed in my concern. So yeah, I had a blast reading that the first entry, and I fully expected it to continue into the second book, given how things have been trending. And what is An Echo of Things to Come about? The story basically picks up right at the end of the previous book, after we had the inevitable grand finale battle. We get a shift of the status quo because of all the deaths and the revelations and these kind of things. Our cast of characters kind of snap into place, into their into the positions they need to be to start building things towards the end game, because much like many second books, much like many middle books in a fantasy series, this one is partially a slow burn, a lot more intrigue, a lot more scheming, a lot more plotting, because it's a lot more setup for a wrap up. So yeah, we find them in their starting positions to play out those particular plots. And so what specifically that means is Davian and his team, they rush towards the boundary to try and do something about the collapse. Weir takes his place as his he takes up his father's post in full, and then we have Asher, who continues to delve into the mysteries of the shadows. Between the three of them and Caden, we start to build a clearer picture of the conflict, both what it is at its core and the scale of it, and not just the scale of it, the things that have been happening that were kind of hinted at in the first book. We get a little more confirmation as we see just how deep this particular these roots go. So yeah, in the first book, James Islington, he really impressed me with his ability to handle multiple complex strands of story, and how he does them, how he plays them out in a way to keep a very dense book feel very compelling, very fast paced, to keep us focused on some very stereotypical characters who at the same time are very interesting to read about. And that's a quality in this book that I just feel is a bit more amplified. It has to be, because by nature, second book, middle book syndrome, this is a little more of a slow burn. It's still as compelling and interesting as the first, but it is a little bit slower, a little bit more thought provoking. And consequently it takes a little more skill to keep your reader engaged, and he manages it brilliantly. Like, I was hooked practically right from the get-go. And I I would have to say this is probably one of the rare cases where I finished the second book in a trilogy and I wasn't like, okay, that's finally over, let's get to the good stuff. Like, I truly enjoyed, I would say, 90% of this book, through and through. It does all the usual things we expect from a middle book. We get an expansion, an expansion of the world. We learn more. We get a delving into the mysteries of this overarching plot, I guess you can say, and it's a lot of mystery. Like one of the core components of this series so far has just been the epic scale of this conflict that's been happening in the background. And in this book, we start to get a better understanding of the key players in it, and just we start to see a bit more than the edges of the picture, and it starts to flesh out in a really wonderful way that just adds to the enjoyment of the series. It's a natural progression that doesn't it somehow doesn't relent in terms of pacing and intensity of everything, and I enjoyed it tremendously, surprisingly, and it couldn't have happened if James Islington wasn't just really good at handling the stereotypes of the genre, because that's one of the coolest things about this series. Like there's nothing new in it. There's nothing like mind blowing. There's nothing shocking. There's no brand new ideas. It's all stuff that fantasy readers should. Most fantasy readers are probably very familiar with. It's just the way he handles it, and how he writes it all is 90% of the compulsion of the driving force behind this series, and he continues to amaze me in how effective he is in managing this. And yeah, it's very much classic stuff, and he just kept me reading. And in keeping with that thread, once again, I'm just amazed at how he continues to take these big ideas that would typically punch big holes in plots, and just manage them in a way that they don't break the story, rather they contribute to it. The drawbacks, the limitations are used so effectively that when we think we know how things are going to play out because of how they because of the nature of these skills and powers, specifically things like time travel and the ability to to detect lies from truth, and so, like, we get enough drawback, enough limitation, enough twists included to make you take everything with a grain of salt, even though it's explicitly stated on the page, and from your perception, from the perception of the point of view of the character, there's no denying that this is fact that they witnessed, or that they experienced. There's just enough twist in there to keep you guessing and keep you thinking. But yeah, all in all, absolutely wonderful book. A great sequel to The Shadow of What Was Lost, and somehow or the other, a very compelling middle book, something that a lot of trilogies fail at. And yeah, I continue to see why this series is so hyped, why this series is so beloved. At this point, I think I can say I'm a believer. Like, I can see this becoming a favorite. Probably not necessarily like my top 10, maybe not even my top 20, but definitely I would rank it among some of the best epic fantasy out there. But yeah, absolute bang of a sequel, and I'm excited to get into the third one. Yeah, that's it for I think all I have to say about this book. I'll get right into it. If you've read this, if you want to share your thoughts, drop something in the comments, as always. And until next time.